Godzilla is many things. Eldritch horror, humanity's greatest mistake of all time. A giant awesome atomic dinosaur that breathes fire and levels cities. A nigh-on unstoppable juggernaut of absolute destruction for anyone that stands in his way. But invulnerable is not one of these things. Across his 70 years on film, he has displayed a number of times being injured and actually a number of weaknesses to very specific weapons or abilities, or even just simply field conditions of battle. While nowhere near as susceptible to damage as you squishy humans, Godzilla is no less still a living, breathing organism, though the breathing part may actually be somewhat up for debate as he doesn't kind of need air, and capable of being wounded. While Saurian superiority does come with its many perks, much like I am right now, we do have our frailties ourselves. I'm Max Allo, your American Allosaurus, and we are going to be counting down Godzilla's strangest, weirdest, and most bizarre weaknesses. And how big of a weakness they actually are. If there's any off the top of your head that you guys know, feel free to comment them below, and while you're there, don't forget to subscribe for more, and leave a like on the video, and suggest more what you'd like to see in the future for this kaiju content. That is also not to say that every single Godzilla does share these weaknesses. Many Godzillas do have specific weaknesses. What worked against MonsterVerse Godzilla may not be as effective against, say, Showa, Heisei, Millennium, Shinra -1. We are not going to be going over the Oxygen Destroyer, largely because it's not technically a weakness. The way it operated is that it simply made Tokyo Bay exceptionally caustic. By turning the water into a highly acidic solution, it dissolved Godzilla's scales, flesh, muscle, and, well, in the original it was bone, but was left behind in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. But that was simply playing by the biological rules of life, eating away at his flesh before and faster than he could heal. For starters, Godzilla does actually have several specific weak points depending on which continuity you're a part of. In Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, Akira Yuki suggests that Godzilla has a weak point under each armpit, pointing to that the skin and scaling being much thinner there, of course naturally allowing for range of motion, and planning to use a special blood coagulant bullet to, well, cause Godzilla's blood inside to coagulate and ultimately basically cause a heart attack. Well, not quite a heart attack. Godzilla's heart is later shown to be a nuclear reactor, with his blood not really being needed in order to move oxygen around. We know this because of Godzilla vs. Mothra, the Battle for Earth. Godzilla remains submerged in the mantle in molten magma for several hours, completely cut off from air. He doesn't need to breathe. More likely, the blood is actually used for cooling Godzilla's internal nuclear reactions. In a way that's actually the same way that we cool nuclear reactors. Though, if this actually did work, because they never actually followed through on it, that would probably just cause Godzilla to quite literally go into a nuclear meltdown. But that is merely one hypothetical, and only applied to Heisei Godzilla. A confirmed one in Heisei Godzilla is his secondary brain. Given the sheer size and scale of his body, the secondary brain, which only is ever brought up in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 and never brought up again, is used to help coordinate Godzilla's motions. Ultimately, it is actually destroyed in the movie utilizing the G-Crusher system and Miki Sugusa help target it, which paralyzes Godzilla. Even though Godzilla is incredibly durable, if such a brain is destroyed, he won't be able to move. This is the same Godzilla that is noted to have incredible regenerative capabilities. And yet, his brain was not healing on its own. It required Fire Rodan's sacrifice to either jumpstart its healing to a fast enough degree to repair the brain, or outright requiring Fire Rodan's energy in order to repair the brain, period. When it comes to MonsterVerse Godzilla, he seems to have some of the fewest weaknesses of all the different iterations of Godzilla, but this could also be due to the fact that we really haven't seen him that much. I mean, he doesn't really get shown all that much, especially in the later MonsterVerse movies. One of the biggest criticisms of them. But that is a video for another time where we actually talk more about Kong, because realistically, it's not actually Kong's fault, but also kind of Kong is a it's a very whole giant complex problem, and at the end of the day, Kong as a character is not the problem. But in the MonsterVerse, Godzilla's weakness points are pretty much limited to just his gills. We can see these quite prominently on his movements. They are, of course, used to help him breathe underwater, as gills are designed to do, but because they are used for breathing, and unlike previous Godzillas, MonsterVerse Godzilla is a natural organism. He does still need to eat, even though Toho's restrictions actually prevent us from seeing Godzilla eat stuff. Fun fact, back in Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019, the original ending was actually going to call for Godzilla to eat the final head of Ghidorah. Yeah, he would have eaten Ichi. Toho, one of their rules for Godzilla is he's not enjoying eating anything, so they changed it to just atomic blasting Ichi into oblivion. I mean, both are still pretty awesome. But it does show Monster vs. Godzilla does need to breathe. We see the Muto actively exploiting this weak point. Keep in mind, the Muto back in Godzilla 2014 were more or less newly hatched, and yet they consistently aim for those points. The male Muto is specifically striking there repeatedly, suggesting that it is an almost instinctive urge by them and a natural weakness of the Titanus Gojira species. Because yes, Titanus Gojira, it is still a canonical species. They never retcon that away, no matter how much people will try to say it was. Something we are also going to be going into detail more on, and we also actually made a video on already. Outside of the gills, which we do see them being actually struck somewhat frequently, King Ghidorah, one of his bites in the final battle in KOTM, does go straight for the throat, and Kong, during some of his battles against Godzilla, does try to aim for the general face area and also the gills. But because, one, the blows are far more distributed about because Kong's fists are pretty massive, while the Muto and King Ghidorah's strikes were much more sharp force, concentrating all the damage on a singular point into the gills, whereas Kong's strikes spread out the force, ultimately leading to far less damage. That's one of the reasons why whenever Kong is really fighting Godzilla, he actually heavily struggles even when going for those headshots. Against anything else, Kong would be able to flatline them, suggesting that despite his gills being a weak point, it's not simply attack here to make Godzilla feel pain. It requires a very specific application of damage. Even in 2014, an errant shot from the military hits Godzilla in the gills, and it caused him to recoil, smashing through the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, it's unknown how much Godzilla actually did feel this, whether it was simply a thing of frustration, as he does surface before the military starts firing on him, so he likely needed to surface anyway to smash through the Golden Gate Bridge. But it is worth noting that Godzilla did at the very least feel that hit. Much like Invincible said in, well, Invincible, just because he felt something doesn't mean it hurt. As sort of a general weakness actually shared amongst most Godzillas, he's actually fairly slow. After all, carrying around that lumbering bulk doesn't tend to lend itself to the quickest of movements, contrary to what you may expect from Godzilla Reigns Again. Though he does move pretty agilely in Godzilla Final Wars. Most incarnations of Godzilla do walk rather slowly. Godzilla -1 pretty much best exemplifies this with his very slow motions. In fact, actually pausing after each and every step. This allows far more agile and maneuverable foes, much like many of his Heisei-era enemies, in order to get the edge on him. Showa-era was actually much quicker than most, but Heisei, almost every Millennium version, and even in the Monsterverse, Godzilla is shown to be able to be outmaneuvered many times by most kaiju. Again, Final Wars being kind of the exception, and even then, he's still outmaneuvered in a couple cases. The reason why Godzilla has such combat effectiveness is due to his balance of durability, power, and speed. He doesn't hard focus, he is a jack of all trades. But that doesn't always allow him to have the edge. Mothra has shown on many occasions to be able to outfight him. In the Monsterverse, largely one of the most powerful versions of Godzilla, Kong is able to somewhat consistently avoid him during the final battle in Hong Kong, for a time. But he does manage to use superior agility to stay out of Godzilla's line of atomic fire, which ultimately does give the edge to the big monkey. Kiryu and Mechagodzilla were able to easily exploit Godzilla's much more lumbering frame for their various respective counterattacks, and Godzilla struggled to deal with the much more agile Monster X in Godzilla Final Wars, despite being pretty much the most acrobatic Godzilla there was. It also does actually benefit the human military, as his slow movement speed allows them to very easily set up ambush points for more specialized superweapons. Things like the Maser system, which does actually show to have a very effective damage against Godzilla, actually recoiling in pain. Going somewhat hand in hand with his rather slow movement speed is, depending on the incarnation, his lack of intelligence. We've actually already made an entire video going over the various intelligence levels of the different Godzillas. Some of them are driven purely by animalistic drive to destroy, things like GMK, which has no other impulses but to destroy, some which ultimately cause its own undoing. Now, it is a supernatural entity possessed by the dead from the dead that Japan caused during WW2, possessing it to cause it to go on a mass destruction spree, with its ultimate destruction being because it continues to want to destroy Japan, utilizing the atomic ray when it has a massive gaping hole in its shoulder, causing it to concussively self-detonate. However, that was a Godzilla that was really not under its own intelligence. A Godzilla that is under its own intelligence and yet still concussively self-destructed itself is Godzilla -1. Blinded by simple pure rage and wrath and really a drive for nothing more than absolute oblivion, even as the barotrauma was ripping its body apart, and it knew this, it still attempted to go for an atomic ray. Now, the atomic ray itself did not ultimately destroy Godzilla alone. It was Shikishima flying into its head and detonating the kamikaze payload, which caused Godzilla's head to be destroyed, preventing it from utilizing the nuclear ray, which caused the built-up atomic energy to seep out of its body and break itself apart. The entire reason he was in that position is because he tunnel vision focused on wanting to destroy. Simply going, waiting, basically doing what any COD player does after they get hit a few times, hide behind cover, let health regen, and come back out to the fight, would have guaranteed a victory. But his impatience, his rage, took over. Yearning only for the blood of his enemies, spelled, well, his blood covering the water. Though he does regenerate at the end, so. The same also does apply to Shin Godzilla, who is, well, there's no guiding intelligence behind those eyes, much like Michimochi EV. He operates purely on instinct, not as dumb as GMK, where GMK has no intelligence, and really, -1 is actually quite intelligent, he just gets tunnel visioned. Shin has really only an animalistic intelligence, reacting throughout the entire movie in nothing but fear. This ultimately allows the military to gain a victory over it. They exploit this lack of intelligence time and time again, leading it into buildings, collapsing them on top of it, pinning it down to fill it up with the blood coagulant, utilizing its instinctive defense mechanism to just burst fire atomic rays to exhaust its nuclear fuel, leave it incapable of defending itself, so they can follow up with Operation Yashiori, which was the blood coagulant plan. Even when it first displays use of its atomic ray, it does not provide any intelligence in guiding the beam, simply flailing its head around. While it does somewhat aim it after, this only is after several seconds of prolonged usage, and it just sweep covers the entire thing, exhausting all of its power to burn Tokyo to the ground, knowing nothing of restraint, which would be utilized against it far later. It similarly proved incapable of discerning the difference between fighter aircraft or manned helicopters and simple UAV drones. Heisei-era Godzilla displayed a unique vulnerability to the element cadmium. The reason for this is cadmium is used as a neutron poison. It is used in nuclear reactors to slow down the rate of nuclear reactions, decreasing radiation. Since Godzilla is, for all intents and purposes, a walking nuclear reactor, introduction of cadmium into its body will slow down the rate of nuclear fission. This is where the thing I mentioned earlier about Godzilla not needing to eat comes from. He is powered by radiation, and anything that slows down or would prevent his nuclear reaction from being done will be the equivalent of making Godzilla starve. This has actually been utilized against him in a number of different ways in a number of different movies. Of course, the cadmium itself, slowing down and weakening Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Destroya and a few other movies, as well as the anti-nuclear energy bacteria utilized against him in Godzilla vs. Biollante onwards. The anti-nuclear energy bacteria would consume nuclear products within Godzilla's body, denying him the ability to use them for fissionable product. This ultimately contributed to his weakness against Mothra and Batra in Godzilla Mothra: The Battle for Earth, leading to their victory, and to Biollante's defeat of Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Biollante. He was ultimately cured of this, but it forced Godzilla to remain underwater in the cold ocean depths simply to keep alive. Other times Godzilla's radiation has been depleted, causing adverse side effects, are, as already been over in Shin Godzilla. Exhausting his nuclear energy caused him to flame out, be incapable of using his atomic ray or even the thermal flame, as well as forcing Shin to go into hibernation for several days until he recuperated enough power. Monsterverse has displayed a somewhat downplayed variant of this in Godzilla vs. Kong. This is actually the canonical explanation for why he struggled against Mechagodzilla and Kong as much as he did. Godzilla was simply tired. He had finished boring a hole all the way to the inner Earth, fought Kong twice, after swimming all around the world looking for the Apex Cybernetics facility where Mechagodzilla was being held. Keep in mind, Apex Cybernetics, when they were testing Mechagodzilla, would cause the Kevin signal, or rather the Ghidorah signal, to be emitted from everywhere the major components were. Even if the skull wasn't located at the Pensacola facility, the eye was still connected to the Mechagodzilla cybernetic system, which would display that signal there. From Godzilla's perspective, multiple Ghidorah signals, or Ghidorah was warping around the planet, which is why he was frantically going continent to continent and destroying Apex facilities. He was spending a significant time period doing this, and after the sheer usage of that much atomic power to bore that hole, fight Kong twice, yeah, he was not at 100%. While it did not prevent him from fighting, it did affect his combat performance. And yes, some will say that is a bit of a cop-out. It is also the canon explanation. I kinda like it because it kind of furthers the idea that humanity can't really fight Godzilla in the Monsterverse. We kinda needed to get a cheap shot at him when he was tired to even remotely have a chance at winning. But Godzilla is very much not a bottomless pit of energy. Showa-era Godzilla displayed a unique weakness to lightning, or rather to simply electricity. This is used frequently to injure and wound him, which is odd considering Godzilla is frequently shown tearing down power lines. This is first utilized against him in the original King Kong vs. Godzilla with King Kong's electrical discharge powers, once again in Mothra vs. Godzilla and Ibra Horror of the Deep, specifically from high-tension power lines and artificial lightning projectors. The oddity is that in Godzilla vs. Hedorah, he displayed an almost immunity to the giant electrode power generators, and in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, he actually received a power bonus from lightning strikes, revitalizing him and granting him his magnetic powers, which allowed him to defeat Mechagodzilla. Showa-era Godzilla, and a slight degree in the Heisei era, Godzilla has displayed a vulnerability to cold temperatures. He becomes far more sluggish and significantly weaker when exposed to extended periods of cold. At the end of Godzilla Raids Again, he was buried under ice and frozen inside of an iceberg for 7 years until he was woken in Godzilla vs. King Kong, or King Kong vs. Godzilla. As well as in Son of Godzilla, he was forced into a hibernative state after a massive snowstorm was artificially created to blanket the island. While they did prove effective at trapping and containing Godzilla for a period of time, the same thing was shown in Godzilla Final Wars, where he was trapped under the ice for an extended period of time. It caused him to temporarily go dormant, but he does not suffer any actual harm as a result of this. Once again, Godzilla doesn't need to eat. His internal nuclear reactor providing all of the necessary energy, and the cold does actually make sense. This is also used to help slow down nuclear reactions. The reason why a meltdown is because of the heat. It doesn't completely stop the nuclear reactions, but it subdues them long enough. Varying Godzillas have displayed varying resistances and varying times frozen. In Godzilla vs. Destroya, burning Godzilla is attempted to be frozen, and it doesn't work. Though this is partially due to his massive nuclear meltdown he is undergoing. And in the Monsterverse, Shimo attempts to freeze Godzilla whole, and he breaks out in relatively short order, which is a bit strange considering that the same kind of attack over a far longer duration just froze Kong's hand and gave him frostbite on the one hand, but a more brief attack completely froze over Godzilla and left him frozen for several seconds. Again, let's have a video on that. And now the last of Godzilla's weaknesses. his own atomic energy. There's been a number of times where Godzilla's atomic energy has been rebounded onto him, most prominently in the Heisei era through the use of the Super X2 with its fire mirror and the plasma grenade in Mechagodzilla 2, both of which were shown to cause significant injury. But Mothra's scales and 3D mirror attack have also shown to reflect Godzilla's atomic ray and blow up back on him, leaving her unharmed, but knocking Godzilla down or injuring him. Space Godzilla also quite literally reflected his atomic ray back at him on a few occasions when it came to Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. In fact, during the entire Netflix anime trilogy, Godzilla's atomic energy is their go-to way to attempt to destroy him. After using electromagnetic pulse disruptors, they destroy Godzilla Filius, and attempt to do the exact same thing to Godzilla Earth. His own power is so great that if turned back in on itself, it will destroy him. So while he may be a jack of all trades, he does focus a lot more on the DPS. But that is all for today, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe for more, comment your thoughts on which of these weaknesses are your favorites, and let us know if we forgot any of them. I've been Max Allo, your American Allosaurus, and we got something very special next week. But that's all from me. Long live the Kaiju King.